Question 1. The audit findings indicate that Swatch's current data processing workflow for customer order fulfillment has a recurring error rate that exceeds acceptable thresholds, potentially impacting regulatory reporting accuracy. Which of the following approaches best addresses this issue while adhering to regulatory compliance and process integrity? Option A. Manually correct all identified erroneous data points immediately to meet reporting deadlines, without investigating the underlying process issues. Option B. Focus solely on retraining staff on data entry procedures without analyzing or modifying the workflow itself. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the existing data processing workflow to identify root causes of errors and implement targeted process improvements and controls. Option D. Implement a temporary workaround by bypassing certain data validation steps in the workflow to speed up processing and reduce the current backlog. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the existing data processing workflow to identify root causes of errors and implement targeted process improvements and controls. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and maintain data integrity. The pressure to quickly resolve audit findings can lead to shortcuts that compromise compliance. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are both effective and legally sound. The correct approach involves a systematic review and validation of the existing data processing workflows at Swatch. This ensures that any identified inefficiencies are addressed by understanding the root cause within the established regulatory framework. By focusing on process optimization, the aim is to enhance accuracy, reduce errors, and improve compliance with relevant data handling and reporting regulations. This aligns with the principle of maintaining robust internal controls and ensuring that all operational processes are designed to meet regulatory standards, thereby preventing future discrepancies and potential penalties. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate data correction without investigating the underlying process failures is professionally unacceptable. This overlooks the systemic issues that led to the audit findings in the first place. Such an approach risks recurring problems and does not demonstrate a commitment to sustainable compliance, which is a core ethical and regulatory expectation. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established data validation protocols to expedite the correction process is also professionally unsound. This directly contravenes the principles of data integrity and accuracy mandated by regulatory bodies. Such actions can lead to unreliable reporting, misinformed decision-making, and significant regulatory breaches. A further incorrect approach that involves implementing a quick fix without proper documentation or stakeholder consultation fails to establish a transparent and auditable trail. This lack of due diligence hinders future oversight and can create confusion regarding the implemented changes, potentially leading to further compliance issues. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the root cause of issues, evaluating potential solutions against regulatory requirements and ethical standards, and implementing changes in a documented, controlled, and validated manner. This involves a proactive approach to compliance, ensuring that processes are not only efficient but also inherently compliant. Question 2. When evaluating potential process optimization initiatives at Swatch, which of the following approaches best balances the drive for efficiency with the necessity of maintaining regulatory compliance and internal control frameworks? Option A. Focusing on streamlining workflows by reducing the number of required approvals for operational tasks, assuming that employees are generally trustworthy and will act in accordance with Swatch's best interests. Option B. Prioritizing changes that offer the most immediate cost savings, even if they require a temporary suspension of certain compliance checks during the transition period. Option C. Implementing a phased approach to process changes, starting with pilot programs that undergo rigorous testing and validation against Swatch's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines before full-scale deployment. Option D. Adopting new technologies that promise significant efficiency gains, without conducting a thorough review of their compatibility with existing data privacy regulations and Swatch's cybersecurity protocols. The correct answer is B. Prioritizing changes that offer the most immediate cost savings, even if they require a temporary suspension of certain compliance checks during the transition period. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and compliance with regulatory expectations. The pressure to optimize processes, especially within a company like Swatch, which operates in a highly competitive and regulated industry, can lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise adherence to established frameworks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process optimization does not lead to regulatory breaches or ethical lapses. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing changes that are not only efficient, but also demonstrably compliant with all applicable Swatch internal policies and external regulatory requirements. This includes thorough documentation of proposed changes, risk assessments, and obtaining necessary approvals before implementation. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical conduct, which are foundational to maintaining Swatch's reputation and operational integrity. It aligns with the principle of responsible business conduct, ensuring that efficiency does not come at the cost of compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on compliance procedures would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a failure to meet regulatory reporting deadlines, inadequate data security measures, or the circumvention of internal audit protocols, all of which carry significant regulatory and financial penalties. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes without proper testing or validation, risks introducing new errors or vulnerabilities that could disrupt operations and lead to non-compliance. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established approval workflows, even if seemingly faster, undermines Swatch's governance structure and can lead to unauthorized or non-compliant actions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives, followed by a comprehensive assessment of the current state, identification of potential solutions, and a rigorous evaluation of each solution against both efficiency and compliance criteria. This includes consulting relevant internal policies, regulatory guidance, and seeking input from compliance and legal departments. The process should be iterative, with continuous monitoring and adjustment to ensure ongoing adherence to standards. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that Swatch's client onboarding process is experiencing significant delays, impacting client satisfaction and operational efficiency. To address this, a proposal has been put forward to streamline the process by reducing the number of mandatory data verification steps for new clients, arguing that this will significantly speed up onboarding. What is the most appropriate approach for Swatch to optimize its client onboarding process in light of this analysis? Option A. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, involving a detailed review of each verification step to identify those that can be automated or streamlined without compromising regulatory compliance or client data security, and conducting pilot tests before full rollout. Option B. Focus solely on digitizing existing verification forms without re-evaluating the necessity or efficiency of each individual verification step. Option C. Outsource the entire client onboarding function to a third-party vendor that specializes in high-speed onboarding, without conducting a thorough due diligence on their compliance and data security protocols. Option D. Immediately reduce the number of mandatory data verification steps by 30% across all client types to achieve rapid efficiency gains, as suggested by the initial proposal. The correct answer is A. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, involving a detailed review of each verification step to identify those that can be automated or streamlined without compromising regulatory compliance or client data security, and conducting pilot tests before full rollout. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the fundamental obligation to maintain the integrity of financial advice and client relationships. The pressure to optimize processes must not compromise regulatory compliance or ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to identify improvements that enhance service delivery without introducing risks or violating established guidelines. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing workflows to identify bottlenecks and redundancies, followed by the implementation of targeted improvements that are validated for effectiveness and compliance. This process ensures that any changes made by Swatch are not only efficient, but also adhere to the principles of good practice and regulatory expectations, such as those outlined by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, which emphasizes treating customers fairly and ensuring robust internal controls. This approach prioritizes client outcomes and regulatory adherence, which are paramount in the financial services industry. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction, without considering the impact on service quality or regulatory adherence, would be professionally unacceptable. For example, automating client communication without adequate human oversight could lead to misinterpretations or the omission of crucial information, potentially breaching FCA principles on clear communication and suitability of advice. Another incorrect approach, such as outsourcing critical client-facing functions to unregulated entities, would directly violate regulatory requirements for oversight and accountability, exposing Swatch to significant compliance risks and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and ethical obligations. This is followed by a thorough assessment of current processes, identifying areas for improvement that align with both efficiency goals and compliance requirements. Any proposed changes should be evaluated for their potential impact on clients, staff, and regulatory standing. Pilot testing and ongoing monitoring are crucial to ensure that implemented changes are effective, compliant, and sustainable. Question 4. Analysis of Swatch's current customer complaint handling process reveals a significant backlog. The company is considering several strategies to optimize this process. Which of the following strategies best balances efficiency with regulatory compliance and customer satisfaction? Option A. Implement a multi-tiered complaint resolution system where initial inquiries are handled by a general customer service team. More complex or escalated issues are directed to specialized teams with greater authority and product expertise. Option B. Immediately escalate all customer complaints, regardless of their nature, to the highest level of management for review and resolution. Option C. Focus solely on reducing the average handling time for all complaints by empowering frontline staff to offer immediate, albeit standardized, resolutions without further investigation. Option D. Consolidate all complaint handling into a single, highly trained customer service department to streamline communication and ensure consistent responses. The correct answer is A. Implement a multi-tiered complaint resolution system where initial inquiries are handled by a general customer service team, and more complex or escalated issues are directed to specialized teams with greater authority and product expertise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must ensure its internal processes for handling customer complaints are not only efficient, but also compliant with relevant consumer protection laws and industry guidelines. The challenge lies in balancing the need for speed and cost-effectiveness with the imperative to provide a fair, transparent, and timely resolution for all customers, regardless of the complexity of their issue. This requires a nuanced understanding of regulatory expectations regarding complaint handling. The correct approach involves establishing a tiered complaint resolution system. The system would first attempt to resolve straightforward issues through a dedicated customer service team, equipped with clear guidelines and empowerment to offer standard remedies. For more complex or escalated complaints, a specialized team with deeper product knowledge and authority to investigate further and offer bespoke solutions would be engaged. This tiered approach ensures that resources are used efficiently, with simpler issues resolved quickly, while more intricate problems receive the necessary attention. This aligns with regulatory expectations for prompt and fair complaint handling, demonstrating a commitment to customer satisfaction and adherence to consumer rights. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a single, under-resourced customer service team to handle all complaints, regardless of complexity. This could lead to delays, inconsistent resolutions, and a failure to adequately address customer grievances, potentially violating regulations that mandate timely and effective complaint resolution. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately escalate every complaint to a senior management level. This is inefficient, costly, and bypasses the opportunity for frontline staff to resolve issues, which can damage customer relationships and create unnecessary bottlenecks, failing to meet the spirit of efficient process optimization, while still adhering to regulatory requirements for fair treatment. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, leading to premature closure of complaints without adequate investigation, would be ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it fails to provide a fair hearing to the customer's concerns. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the regulatory landscape governing complaint handling. They should then map out the customer journey for complaints, identifying potential bottlenecks and areas for improvement. Implementing a phased resolution process with clear escalation paths and defined responsibilities allows for both efficiency and thoroughness. Regular review and feedback loops are crucial to continuously optimize the process and ensure ongoing compliance and customer satisfaction. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that certain manual data reconciliation processes within Swatch's financial reporting department are time-consuming and prone to human error. To address this, management is considering several options to optimize these workflows. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for efficiency with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and regulatory compliance? Option A. Outsource the entire reconciliation process to a third-party vendor without a detailed assessment of their control environment or regulatory adherence. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the existing reconciliation process, identifying bottlenecks and non-value-added steps, and then redesign the workflow to incorporate automated checks and balances before full implementation. Option C. Implement a new automated reconciliation system after a brief pilot phase, focusing primarily on reducing the time spent on manual tasks. Option D. Immediately reduce the number of staff involved in manual reconciliations to cut costs, assuming the remaining staff can absorb the workload. Correct answer is C. Implement a new automated reconciliation system after a brief pilot phase, focusing primarily on reducing the time spent on manual tasks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and compliance with regulatory expectations. The pressure to demonstrate cost savings can sometimes lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise the integrity of processes, potentially exposing Swatch to regulatory scrutiny or operational risks. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that enhance efficiency without undermining these critical safeguards. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing workflows, focusing on identifying and eliminating non-value-added steps, while ensuring that all necessary control points and compliance checks remain intact. This might involve leveraging technology for automation, streamlining documentation, or reallocating resources to higher-impact activities. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with the fundamental principles of good governance and operational management. Specifically, it adheres to the implicit regulatory expectation that companies maintain effective internal controls to prevent fraud, errors, and noncompliance. By focusing on process optimization within a controlled framework, Swatch demonstrates a commitment to both efficiency and regulatory adherence, thereby mitigating risks and fostering sustainable operational improvements. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on headcount reduction without a thorough analysis of the impact on critical control functions would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the interconnectedness of operational processes and the potential for such cuts to create control gaps. This could lead to increased errors, delayed reporting, or even breaches of regulatory requirements, as fewer personnel may be available to perform essential checks and balances. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough testing and validation of new processes would also be professionally unsound. This haste could result in the deployment of inefficient or non-compliant automated systems, leading to operational disruptions and potential regulatory sanctions. The failure here lies in sacrificing due diligence for expediency, which is contrary to the professional obligation to ensure that changes are robust and sustainable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of current processes, including their control mechanisms and regulatory touchpoints. This should be followed by a detailed assessment of potential efficiency gains, always evaluating these against the impact on controls and compliance. Solutions should be piloted and tested rigorously before full implementation, with clear metrics for success that include both efficiency improvements and the maintenance of control integrity. Regular review and adaptation of processes, informed by performance data and evolving regulatory landscapes, are also crucial components of professional decision-making in this area. Question 6. Compliance review shows that Swatch is considering a significant overhaul of its client onboarding process to improve efficiency and reduce operational costs. Which of the following approaches to this process optimization is most aligned with regulatory expectations and professional responsibility? Option A. Conduct a detailed regulatory impact assessment of each proposed change, identifying potential compliance risks and developing specific mitigation strategies before implementation, ensuring that all changes are reviewed by the compliance department. Option B. Delegate the entire optimization project to the operations team, trusting their expertise in streamlining workflows without requiring formal sign-off from the compliance or legal departments. Option C. Adopt a wait-and-see approach, observing how competitors optimize their onboarding processes and then implementing similar changes, believing that industry trends reflect regulatory acceptance. Option D. Prioritize implementing changes that demonstrably reduce processing time and headcount, assuming that efficiency gains inherently lead to better compliance by freeing up resources. The correct answer is D. Prioritize implementing changes that demonstrably reduce processing time and headcount, assuming that efficiency gains inherently lead to better compliance by freeing up resources. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must balance the efficiency gains from process optimization with its absolute obligation to adhere to all applicable regulatory frameworks. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing improvements without inadvertently creating new compliance risks or violating existing rules. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed optimization does not compromise data integrity, client confidentiality, or fair treatment of customers, all of which are core tenets of financial regulation. The correct approach involves a thorough, risk-based assessment of proposed process changes. This means understanding the current regulatory landscape, identifying potential impacts of the optimization on compliance obligations, and implementing safeguards to mitigate any identified risks. Specifically, this approach prioritizes understanding how changes might affect data handling, reporting accuracy, and client interaction protocols, ensuring that any new process remains compliant with relevant regulations. This aligns with the principle of compliance by design, where regulatory considerations are integrated into the process from the outset, rather than being an afterthought. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations of Swatch. Such an approach risks significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust, as it prioritizes financial gain over adherence to the law. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or industry best practices without a specific regulatory impact assessment is also flawed. While industry trends can be informative, they do not supersede the specific legal requirements governing Swatch's operations. Relying on general best practices without validating their compliance within Swatch's specific regulatory environment can lead to unintentional breaches. A further incorrect approach that delegates the entire optimization process to a non-compliance team without adequate oversight or input from compliance experts is problematic. While efficiency is important, the ultimate responsibility for regulatory compliance rests with the firm. Without proper compliance involvement, critical regulatory nuances can be overlooked, leading to non-compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the proposed process optimization. 2. Conduct a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment, mapping the proposed changes against all relevant laws, rules, and guidelines applicable to Swatch. 3. Engage compliance and legal experts to review the assessment and proposed changes. 4. Develop and implement mitigation strategies for any identified compliance risks. 5. Establish ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms to ensure continued compliance post-implementation. 6. Document all steps, assessments, and decisions for audit and future reference. Question 7. Research into Swatch's internal audit department's approach to optimizing the accounts payable process reveals a proposal to significantly reduce manual checks and introduce automated invoice processing. What is the most professionally sound approach to ensure this optimization effort aligns with regulatory expectations and maintains robust internal controls? Option A. Focus on integrating the new system with existing IT infrastructure, without a specific review of how the automation impacts existing financial controls or regulatory reporting requirements. Option B. Implement the automated invoice processing system immediately to realize cost savings, with a plan to address any control gaps identified post-implementation. Option C. Prioritize the reduction of manual checks to achieve the fastest possible efficiency gains, deferring any detailed control review until the new system is fully operational. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the proposed automated process, identifying potential control weaknesses and regulatory compliance gaps, and develop mitigation strategies before full implementation. The correct answer is B. Implement the automated invoice processing system immediately to realize cost savings, with a plan to address any control gaps identified post-implementation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficiency and cost reduction with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and compliance with regulatory expectations. Swatch, as a publicly traded company, is subject to scrutiny regarding its financial reporting and operational integrity. A hasty or poorly considered approach to process optimization could inadvertently create new risks or exacerbate existing ones, potentially leading to regulatory breaches, financial misstatements, or reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to identify optimization opportunities that enhance efficiency without compromising compliance or control effectiveness. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based methodology for process optimization. This entails a thorough understanding of existing processes, identification of potential risks and control gaps, and the development of solutions that not only improve efficiency, but also strengthen controls and ensure ongoing regulatory adherence. This approach prioritizes a comprehensive review, stakeholder engagement, and rigorous testing before implementation, aligning with principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance frameworks that emphasize proactive risk management and control design. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering control implications would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the elimination of critical control activities, increasing the risk of errors, fraud, or noncompliance. For example, automating a process without adequate validation checks could result in widespread inaccuracies going undetected. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thoroughness would also be problematic. Rushing through the design and testing phases might overlook subtle but significant control weaknesses or regulatory noncompliance issues that could surface later, leading to costly remediation and potential penalties. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without proper documentation or stakeholder buy-in would undermine transparency and accountability. This lack of clear audit trails and understanding among relevant teams can lead to confusion, operational disruptions, and difficulties in demonstrating compliance to regulators. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives, including both efficiency gains and compliance requirements. This framework should involve a risk assessment to identify potential pitfalls, followed by the development of alternative solutions, each evaluated for its impact on efficiency, controls, and regulatory adherence. The chosen solution should be subject to thorough testing and validation before full implementation, with ongoing monitoring to ensure sustained effectiveness. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates that a new, streamlined process for customer onboarding at Swatch has significantly reduced processing times. However, a review of the process documentation reveals that certain data verification steps, previously mandated by internal policy to ensure compliance with Know Your Customer (KIC) regulations, have been omitted to achieve this speed. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Proceed with the new, faster process, assuming that the omitted steps are not critical for current regulatory adherence. Option B. Implement the new process but instruct the onboarding team to manually reintroduce the omitted verification steps on a case-by-case basis when deemed necessary. Option C. Immediately revert to the previous, slower onboarding process to ensure full compliance. Option D. Halt the implementation of the new process and conduct a thorough review to identify alternative methods for achieving efficiency, while ensuring all regulatory and internal policy requirements for KYC are met. The correct answer is C. Immediately revert to the previous, slower onboarding process to ensure full compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the efficiency gains from process optimization with the imperative to maintain regulatory compliance and ethical conduct within Swatch's operations. The pressure to improve performance can sometimes lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical control points, which could have significant consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts do not compromise the integrity of Swatch's processes or its adherence to relevant regulations. The correct approach involves a systematic review and validation of the optimized process against all applicable regulatory requirements and internal policies before full implementation. This ensures that efficiency improvements are achieved without introducing new risks or violating compliance standards. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and the need for robust internal controls, which are often mandated or strongly implied by regulatory frameworks governing financial services or operational integrity. It prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and its impact on operational changes. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact would fail to uphold the duty of care owed to stakeholders and could lead to breaches of regulations designed to protect consumers, market integrity, or data privacy. This could result in fines, reputational damage, and loss of trust. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough testing and validation risks introducing errors or vulnerabilities into Swatch's systems, potentially leading to operational failures or noncompliance. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential downstream consequences of rushed changes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the objective of the optimization. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential impacts, including regulatory, operational, and ethical considerations. A risk-based approach is crucial, where potential risks are identified, analyzed, and mitigated. Collaboration with compliance and legal departments is essential to ensure all regulatory nuances are addressed. Finally, a phased implementation with continuous monitoring and feedback loops allows for adjustments and ensures that the optimized process remains compliant and effective. Question 9. Comparative studies suggest that process optimization can significantly improve operational efficiency. If Swatch is considering implementing a new automated customer service system to streamline inquiries, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with regulatory compliance? Option A. Focus on the technical capabilities of the system to handle the highest volume of inquiries, assuming that regulatory compliance will be addressed through general company policies. Option B. Implement the system with minimal upfront regulatory checks, relying on the vendor's assurances of compliance to mitigate risks. Option C. Prioritize the fastest implementation of the new system to realize cost savings immediately, with a post-implementation review of any regulatory issues that arise. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable data protection and consumer rights regulations. Assess the proposed system's adherence to these, and involve legal and compliance teams in the design and testing phases. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the fastest implementation of the new system to realize cost savings immediately, with a post-implementation review of any regulatory issues that arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must ensure its process optimization initiatives not only enhance efficiency, but also strictly adhere to the regulatory framework governing its operations. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for innovation and cost reduction with the imperative of compliance, particularly when changes might impact data handling, customer interactions, or product quality, all of which are subject to specific regulations. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement optimizations that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and then proposing changes that are evaluated against the relevant regulatory requirements before implementation. This proactive compliance assessment ensures that any optimization does not inadvertently lead to breaches of regulations. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and regulatory adherence expected of companies operating within a defined legal framework. It prioritizes maintaining integrity and trust by ensuring that operational improvements do not compromise legal obligations or ethical standards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations of Swatch. Implementing changes that might, for example, compromise data privacy or lead to non-compliant product labeling would expose the company to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment is equally flawed. Rushing through optimization without adequate due diligence can lead to unforeseen compliance issues that are far more costly and time-consuming to rectify than a well-planned, compliant implementation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to Swatch's operations. When considering process optimization, the first step should be to identify all applicable regulations. Proposed changes must then be assessed for their potential impact on compliance. If a proposed change raises regulatory concerns, it should be modified or rejected. This systematic approach ensures that efficiency gains are achieved within the bounds of legal and ethical conduct, fostering sustainable business practices. Question 10. Strategic planning requires Swatch to optimize its hiring process to attract top talent efficiently. Considering the need for a robust and compliant recruitment framework, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with regulatory adherence and ethical considerations? Option A. Expediting the hiring timeline by significantly reducing the number of assessment stages and candidate interviews to speed up decision-making. Option B. Implementing a phased approach to process optimization, starting with data analysis to identify bottlenecks, followed by targeted technological integration and rigorous testing, ensuring all changes comply with relevant data protection and anti-discrimination laws. Option C. Focusing exclusively on reducing recruitment costs by outsourcing a larger portion of the process to third-party vendors without a thorough review of their compliance standards. Option D. Introducing new applicant tracking systems and AI-driven screening tools immediately without comprehensive pilot testing or staff training to leverage the latest technology. The correct answer is B. Implementing a phased approach to process optimization, starting with data analysis to identify bottlenecks, followed by targeted technological integration and rigorous testing, ensuring all changes comply with relevant data protection and anti-discrimination laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must ensure its internal processes align with the principles of good governance and operational efficiency, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial services or consumer goods manufacturing, depending on the specific context of the Swatch hiring assessment test jurisdiction. The challenge lies in balancing the need for speed and cost-effectiveness in hiring with the imperative to maintain high standards of fairness, data integrity, and compliance. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that optimizes process without compromising these critical elements. The correct approach involves a systematic review and refinement of existing hiring workflows, focusing on identifying bottlenecks, redundancies, and areas for technological integration, while ensuring that all changes adhere to data protection regulations and anti-discrimination laws. This approach is right because it proactively addresses inefficiencies and potential compliance risks. By focusing on data-driven insights and stakeholder feedback, it ensures that process optimization is not merely about speed, but also about enhancing the quality of hires and maintaining a fair and transparent recruitment process, which is a cornerstone of ethical business practice and regulatory expectation in most jurisdictions. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed above all else, such as drastically reducing candidate assessment stages or bypassing necessary background checks, would fail to uphold regulatory requirements for due diligence and fair treatment of applicants. This could lead to discriminatory hiring practices, breaches of data privacy, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing new technologies without adequate testing or training, risks introducing errors, compromising data security, and creating an inequitable candidate experience, potentially violating consumer protection laws or industry best practices. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on process quality or candidate experience could lead to a decline in the caliber of hires and alienate potential talent, indirectly impacting business performance and potentially contravening principles of responsible business conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to Swatch's operations. This involves identifying key performance indicators for the hiring process, assessing current process strengths and weaknesses through data analysis and stakeholder consultation, and then developing a prioritized list of optimization initiatives. Each initiative should be evaluated against its potential impact on efficiency, cost, candidate experience, and regulatory compliance. Pilot testing and continuous monitoring are crucial to ensure that implemented changes are effective and sustainable. Question 11. Regulatory review indicates that Swatch's current customer complaint handling process is experiencing delays. To optimize this process, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with strict adherence to the applicable regulatory framework governing financial services and consumer protection? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing complaint handling workflow, identifying specific regulatory touchpoints and potential bottlenecks, and then implement targeted procedural changes and staff training to streamline resolution while ensuring all regulatory requirements are met. Option B. Implement a new, faster ticketing system that automatically closes complaints after a set period if no customer response is received, without a manual review of the complaint's resolution status. Option C. Introduce a policy that limits the types of complaints Swatch will formally investigate, directing less complex issues to a general customer service FAQ page. Option D. Outsource complaint handling to a third-party vendor that specializes in rapid resolution, with minimal oversight from Swatch to reduce internal resource allocation. Correct answer is B. Implement a new, faster ticketing system that automatically closes complaints after a set period if no customer response is received, without a manual review of the complaint's resolution status. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must ensure its internal processes for handling customer complaints align with the specific regulatory framework governing its operations. The challenge lies in balancing efficiency with the absolute requirement of regulatory compliance. A failure to do so can lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Careful judgment is required to identify the most effective and compliant method for optimizing complaint handling. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing complaint handling procedures against the relevant regulatory guidelines, identifying bottlenecks, and implementing targeted improvements that enhance efficiency without compromising adherence to legal and ethical standards. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core of process optimization within a regulated environment. It prioritizes understanding and applying the specific rules and guidelines applicable to Swatch, ensuring that any changes made are not only efficient but also fully compliant. This proactive and compliant method safeguards the company from regulatory breaches and demonstrates a commitment to customer service that meets legal obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory requirements is professionally unacceptable. This would involve implementing changes that might expedite complaint resolution, but could inadvertently bypass necessary documentation, verification steps, or reporting obligations mandated by the regulatory framework. Such an approach risks violating specific rules, leading to potential fines or sanctions. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction above all else, without a thorough assessment of regulatory impact, is also professionally flawed. While cost efficiency is important, it cannot come at the expense of compliance. Cutting corners on processes that have regulatory implications, such as data privacy during complaint handling or the thoroughness of investigations, can lead to severe regulatory penalties. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or industry best practices from unrelated sectors, without grounding the optimization in Swatch's specific regulatory obligations, is also problematic. While external insights can be valuable, they must be filtered through the lens of the applicable regulatory framework. Applying generic solutions without verifying their compatibility with Swatch's legal environment can lead to non-compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the specific regulatory obligations applicable to Swatch's operations, particularly concerning customer complaints. 2. Map the current complaint handling process in detail. 3. Identify areas for improvement that align with both efficiency goals and regulatory requirements. 4. Propose and implement changes, ensuring thorough documentation and training. 5. Regularly review and audit the optimized process to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 12. Consider a scenario where the Swatch hiring assessment test team is tasked with streamlining the candidate feedback process to reduce turnaround time. One proposed method involves automating the generation of standardized feedback reports using a new software tool. However, this tool requires direct access to the raw assessment data, which includes sensitive candidate information. The team is debating whether to proceed with full automation immediately or to implement a phased approach where human oversight is maintained for initial report reviews. What is the most professionally sound approach to process optimization in this situation, balancing efficiency with regulatory and ethical considerations? Option A. Proceed with partial automation, where only non-sensitive data points are used for automated feedback, and manual compilation of sensitive feedback is maintained. Option B. Adopt a phased approach, initially automating report generation, but requiring human review of all reports before they are sent to candidates, while simultaneously developing robust data security protocols for the new software. Option C. Delay the automation project indefinitely until a completely new, custom-built software solution can be developed that eliminates the need for direct access to raw assessment data. Option D. Implement the full automation of feedback report generation immediately to achieve maximum efficiency gains, trusting the software's integrity. The correct answer is D. Implement the full automation of feedback report generation immediately to achieve maximum efficiency gains, trusting the software's integrity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and compliance with regulatory expectations, specifically within the context of the Swatch hiring assessment test's implied jurisdiction. The pressure to optimize processes for speed can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise data integrity, client confidentiality, or adherence to established procedures, all of which are critical for maintaining trust and regulatory standing. Careful judgment is required to identify improvements that enhance efficiency without introducing undue risk. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing workflows, focusing on identifying bottlenecks and redundancies that can be addressed through technology or revised procedures, while ensuring that all changes are documented and validated against relevant regulatory guidelines. This approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the current process, stakeholder consultation, and a phased implementation with clear metrics for success. It aligns with the principles of good governance and operational excellence, ensuring that process optimization contributes to both efficiency and compliance. Regulatory frameworks, such as those implied by a hiring assessment test, often emphasize the importance of documented procedures, risk management, and continuous improvement to ensure fair and transparent operations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the impact on data accuracy or compliance would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to errors in candidate data, potential breaches of privacy regulations, or a failure to meet the assessment's stated objectives, thereby undermining the integrity of the hiring process. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established approval channels for implementing changes, even if seemingly minor, risks introducing unintended consequences or violating internal governance policies. This demonstrates a lack of respect for established controls and can create a precedent for future noncompliance. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal intuition, rather than data-driven analysis to justify process changes, fails to provide a sound basis for decision-making and may overlook critical risks or opportunities for genuine improvement. Such an approach is not grounded in best practices for operational management and can lead to suboptimal outcomes. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear definition of the problem or opportunity for improvement. This should be followed by a comprehensive analysis of the current state, including identifying key performance indicators and potential risks. Next, potential solutions should be brainstormed, evaluated against criteria such as efficiency, cost, risk, and regulatory compliance, and then piloted or tested. Finally, successful changes should be implemented, monitored, and continuously reviewed for further optimization. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with organizational objectives and regulatory requirements. Question 13. System analysis indicates that Swatch's internal accounting department is experiencing delays in its month-end closing process due to manual data reconciliation. To address this, a proposal has been put forward to streamline the reconciliation by implementing a new automated system. However, the proposed system has not undergone extensive testing for its ability to handle all edge cases and complex transaction types that Swatch encounters. Considering the regulatory framework governing financial reporting for companies like Swatch, which of the following approaches to process optimization is most professionally sound? Option A. Implement the new automated system immediately to expedite the closing process, with a plan to address any identified issues in subsequent months. Option B. Delay the implementation of the new system until a comprehensive, multi-year testing period has been completed, even if it means continued manual reconciliation delays. Option C. Conduct a phased rollout of the new automated system, starting with less complex transactions, and implement rigorous validation and reconciliation checks at each stage before expanding to all transaction types. Option D. Outsource the entire reconciliation process to a third-party vendor without fully understanding their internal controls and compliance procedures. The correct answer is A. Implement the new automated system immediately to expedite the closing process, with a plan to address any identified issues in subsequent months. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the fundamental obligation to maintain accurate and compliant financial reporting. The pressure to optimize processes, while a legitimate business objective, must not compromise the integrity of the data used for regulatory filings and internal decision-making. Careful judgment is required to identify process improvements that enhance efficiency without introducing risks of misstatement or non-compliance. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of targeted improvements that are validated for accuracy and compliance. This ensures that any optimization efforts do not inadvertently lead to errors in financial data or breaches of regulatory requirements. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of sound financial management and regulatory adherence, which mandate that all financial reporting is based on accurate, complete, and verifiable information. The emphasis on validation and testing before full implementation is crucial for mitigating risks and ensuring that the optimized processes continue to meet all legal and regulatory obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering data integrity risks regulatory noncompliance. For instance, automating data entry without robust validation checks could lead to the propagation of errors, resulting in inaccurate financial statements. This failure to ensure accuracy directly contravenes regulatory expectations for reliable financial reporting. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction by eliminating quality control steps would similarly expose Swatch to significant compliance risks. The absence of these checks increases the likelihood of undetected errors, which could lead to material misstatements in financial reports, attracting regulatory scrutiny and potential penalties. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without proper documentation or audit trails hinders the ability to demonstrate compliance and can make it difficult to identify and rectify issues, thereby undermining the overall control environment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance and accuracy alongside efficiency. This involves a thorough risk assessment of any proposed process changes, ensuring that all improvements are tested and validated against regulatory requirements and internal control standards before full deployment. A continuous monitoring and review process should also be in place to ensure ongoing adherence to both efficiency goals and regulatory obligations. Question 14. The investigation demonstrates that Swatch is experiencing significant delays in its production line due to an outdated inventory management system and a lack of standardized quality control procedures across its various manufacturing facilities. To address this, Swatch is considering several process optimization strategies. Which of the following strategies best balances the need for increased efficiency with the imperative of maintaining Swatch's reputation for high-quality timepieces and adherence to international manufacturing standards? Option A. Conducting a thorough analysis of current inventory and quality control processes, involving input from on-site teams, to identify specific areas for improvement, followed by phased implementation of revised procedures and technology upgrades. Option B. Reducing the number of quality control checkpoints on the production line to speed up output, assuming that the new inventory system will compensate for any resulting quality issues. Option C. Outsourcing a significant portion of the quality control checks to third-party vendors to expedite the process, without a comprehensive review of the vendor's own compliance standards. Option D. Implementing a new, fully automated inventory tracking system and mandating a single, centralized quality control protocol for all facilities, with immediate rollout. The correct answer is D. Implementing a new, fully automated inventory tracking system and mandating a single, centralized quality control protocol for all facilities, with immediate rollout. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a scenario where Swatch, a global watch manufacturer, is facing challenges in optimizing its supply chain processes to meet increasing demand, while adhering to stringent quality control standards. This is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the non-negotiable imperative of product integrity and regulatory compliance. A misstep in process optimization could lead to increased costs, delays, reputational damage, and potential breaches of regulatory requirements related to product safety and manufacturing standards. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through data analysis and stakeholder consultation, and then implementing targeted improvements that enhance throughput and reduce waste without compromising quality. This might include adopting lean manufacturing principles, investing in automation where appropriate, and strengthening supplier relationships through collaborative quality assurance programs. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and operational excellence, ensuring that Swatch not only meets market demands, but also upholds its commitment to producing high-quality, compliant products. It proactively addresses potential risks and fosters a culture of continuous improvement, which is often implicitly or explicitly encouraged by regulatory frameworks governing manufacturing and international trade. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction by cutting corners on quality checks or rushing production stages would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely lead to an increase in defective products, customer complaints, and potential recalls, which could trigger investigations by regulatory bodies and result in significant fines and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach might be to implement new technologies without adequate training or integration planning, leading to operational disruptions and further inefficiencies, potentially violating workplace safety regulations or data privacy laws if customer information is mishandled. A third incorrect approach could be to disregard feedback from production line staff, who possess invaluable on-the-ground knowledge of process flaws, leading to the implementation of ineffective or counterproductive changes, and potentially violating principles of fair labor practices and employee engagement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a holistic view of process optimization. This involves understanding the interplay between efficiency, quality, cost, and regulatory compliance. Key steps include clearly defining objectives, gathering comprehensive data, consulting with all relevant stakeholders, including operational staff and compliance officers, evaluating potential solutions against established criteria, including regulatory adherence, piloting changes, and establishing robust monitoring mechanisms to ensure sustained improvement and compliance. Question 15. The analysis reveals that Swatch's current candidate assessment process has several manual steps that are time-consuming. To improve efficiency, a proposal suggests automating these steps by integrating a new third-party assessment platform. Which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical considerations for the Swatch hiring assessment test? Option A. Automate only the most obvious time-consuming steps without consulting the compliance department to expedite the process. Option B. Conduct a thorough due diligence on the third-party platform, focusing on its compliance with data privacy, security, and assessment validity standards as defined by the Swatch Hiring Assessment Tests regulatory framework before integration. Option C. Prioritize the cheapest automation solution to maximize cost savings, with a plan to address any compliance issues after the system is live. Option D. Implement the automation immediately to gain a competitive advantage through faster hiring cycles, assuming the platform is widely used. The correct answer is D. Implement the automation immediately to gain a competitive advantage through faster hiring cycles, assuming the platform is widely used. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must balance the need for operational efficiency with its obligations under the relevant regulatory framework. The challenge lies in identifying process improvements that not only enhance productivity, but also ensure continued compliance and uphold ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to avoid implementing changes that, while appearing efficient, could inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory requirements or compromise data integrity. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks, and proposing solutions that are demonstrably compliant with the Swatch Hiring Assessment Tests specific regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes understanding the why behind current procedures, ensuring that any proposed optimization aligns with the spirit and letter of the regulations. Specifically, it requires a proactive engagement with compliance teams and a detailed assessment of how proposed changes impact data handling, candidate privacy, and assessment validity, all within the confines of the Swatch Hiring Assessment Tests stipulated guidelines. This ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the cost of regulatory adherence or ethical conduct. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory implications would fail to uphold the integrity of the hiring process. For instance, bypassing necessary verification steps to expedite candidate onboarding, even if it seems efficient, could violate data protection regulations or assessment validity standards stipulated by the Swatch Hiring Assessment Test. Another incorrect approach might involve adopting new technologies without a proper risk assessment against the regulatory framework. This could lead to unintended consequences, such as the introduction of biases not permitted by the assessment guidelines or the mishandling of sensitive candidate information, thereby breaching compliance requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape governing the Swatch Hiring Assessment Test. This involves identifying key compliance objectives and potential risks associated with any proposed process change. The next step is to evaluate proposed optimizations against these objectives and risks, prioritizing solutions that demonstrably enhance efficiency while maintaining or improving compliance. Collaboration with legal and compliance departments is crucial to validate proposed changes before implementation. Finally, a robust monitoring and review mechanism should be established to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations post-implementation. Question 16. Compliance review shows that Swatch's internal client onboarding process has become increasingly time-consuming, impacting client satisfaction and operational throughput. To address this, a proposal has been made to streamline data verification steps by utilizing a third-party data aggregation service that offers faster verification, but has a less transparent data handling policy. Which of the following approaches best balances process optimization with regulatory compliance for Swatch? Option A. Proceed with the third-party data aggregation service, assuming its speed benefits outweigh the need for a deep dive into its data handling policies, as long as it claims to be compliant. Option B. Implement the third-party service immediately to gain efficiency and address any compliance concerns that may arise retrospectively through internal audits. Option C. Develop an entirely new internal system for data verification that replicates the functionality of the third-party service, prioritizing internal control over external vendor reliance, even if it is more costly and time-consuming initially. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive due diligence on the third-party data aggregation service, focusing on its data security protocols, privacy policies, and compliance with all relevant data protection regulations before integration. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the third-party data aggregation service, assuming its speed benefits outweigh the need for a deep dive into its data handling policies, as long as it claims to be compliant. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must balance the efficiency gains from process optimization with its absolute obligation to comply with all applicable regulatory frameworks. The core tension lies in ensuring that improvements do not inadvertently lead to breaches of compliance, particularly concerning data handling and client confidentiality, which are paramount in the financial services industry. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement optimizations that enhance operational effectiveness without compromising regulatory adherence or ethical standards. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and then proposing and implementing changes that are demonstrably compliant with all relevant regulations. This includes thorough risk assessments and impact analyses before implementation, ensuring that any new or modified process maintains or enhances data security, client privacy, and reporting accuracy as mandated by the Swatch hiring assessment tests regulatory jurisdiction. This methodical approach ensures that process optimization serves to strengthen, rather than weaken, the firm's compliance posture. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without a corresponding rigorous compliance check would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from prioritizing operational efficiency over regulatory obligations, potentially leading to breaches of data protection laws, inadequate record keeping, or misrepresentation of information, all of which carry significant legal and reputational risks. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or without proper validation, risks introducing new compliance vulnerabilities or failing to achieve the intended process improvements, thereby undermining both efficiency and regulatory standing. A third incorrect approach, which bypasses necessary internal approvals or expert consultation on compliance matters, demonstrates a disregard for established governance structures and a failure to leverage specialized knowledge, increasing the likelihood of noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates compliance considerations from the outset of any process optimization initiative. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to Swatch's operations, conducting a thorough gap analysis between current processes and desired outcomes against these requirements, and engaging compliance and legal teams early and often. The process should be iterative, with continuous monitoring and evaluation to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations and to adapt to any changes in the regulatory landscape. Question 17. To address the challenge of streamlining internal workflows at Swatch to improve operational efficiency without compromising regulatory adherence, which of the following strategies represents the most professionally sound approach? Option A. Adopt a move fast and break things mentality, prioritizing rapid implementation of new technologies and workflows to gain a competitive edge, with the understanding that regulatory adjustments can be made later. Option B. Implement process changes immediately based on internal team consensus, assuming they align with general industry best practices, and address any potential regulatory issues retrospectively if they arise. Option C. Focus exclusively on cost-saving measures in process optimization, as regulatory compliance is a separate department's responsibility and should not impede efficiency initiatives. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of current processes, identifying areas for improvement, and then rigorously assess each proposed optimization against all applicable regulatory requirements and internal compliance policies before implementation. The correct answer is B. Implement process changes immediately based on internal team consensus, assuming they align with general industry best practices, and address any potential regulatory issues retrospectively if they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Swatch, as a regulated entity, must balance the need for operational efficiency with its obligations to comply with all relevant financial regulations. Pressure to optimize processes, especially in a competitive market, can sometimes lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical compliance steps. This requires careful judgment to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise regulatory adherence or client interests. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks, and proposing improvements that are vetted against regulatory requirements before implementation. This ensures that any changes made by Swatch are not only efficient, but also fully compliant with the applicable regulatory framework. This aligns with the fundamental principle of maintaining the integrity of financial operations and protecting clients, as mandated by regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness would fail to adequately assess the regulatory implications of process changes. This could lead to inadvertent breaches of compliance, potentially resulting in fines, reputational damage, and loss of client trust for Swatch. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on operational controls or client service would also be professionally unacceptable, as it neglects the broader responsibilities of a regulated firm. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without proper documentation or audit trails would hinder future compliance reviews and investigations, creating significant regulatory risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Swatch's operations. This involves proactively identifying potential compliance risks associated with any proposed process optimization. The next step is to evaluate proposed changes against these identified risks, seeking expert advice where necessary. Finally, implementing changes should be accompanied by robust monitoring and documentation to ensure ongoing compliance and facilitate audits. Question 18. The review process indicates that Swatch's internal procedures for onboarding new clients are taking longer than industry benchmarks, potentially impacting client acquisition rates. Considering the need for process optimization, which of the following strategies would best balance efficiency with regulatory compliance? Option A. Implementing a phased onboarding process that prioritizes essential regulatory checks upfront and defers less critical administrative tasks to a later stage, ensuring all mandatory compliance steps are completed before client engagement. Option B. Automating the entire client onboarding workflow without any human review points to achieve maximum speed. Option C. Delegating all client suitability assessments to junior staff with minimal oversight to speed up the review cycle. Option D. Reducing the number of mandatory client information fields required during the initial onboarding to expedite the process, relying on post-onboarding checks for any missing data. The correct answer is A. Implementing a phased onboarding process that prioritizes essential regulatory checks upfront and defers less critical administrative tasks to a later stage, ensuring all mandatory compliance steps are completed before client engagement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficiency in Swatch's internal processes with the imperative to adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing financial advice and client interactions. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant compliance breaches, reputational damage, and potential penalties. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and implementing process optimizations that enhance operational effectiveness without compromising regulatory integrity or client best interests. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing workflows to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of targeted improvements that are demonstrably compliant with all relevant regulations. This approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, ensuring that any proposed changes are vetted against specific legal and ethical requirements. For Swatch, this means ensuring that any optimization of the review process for client suitability, for example, does not inadvertently reduce the rigor of due diligence or the quality of advice provided, thereby upholding their duty of care and regulatory obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, automating client suitability checks without adequate human oversight or validation mechanisms could lead to overlooking critical risk factors or client needs, violating principles of client protection, and potentially contravening regulations that mandate a thorough assessment. Another incorrect approach might involve streamlining documentation requirements in a way that omits essential disclosures or evidence of compliance, thereby failing to meet regulatory standards for record-keeping and transparency. Such actions would expose Swatch to regulatory scrutiny and undermine client trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory objectives behind existing processes. This involves asking, what is this process designed to achieve from a regulatory and client protection standpoint? Subsequently, potential optimizations should be evaluated not only for their efficiency gains, but also for their impact on compliance. A risk-based assessment, considering the potential for regulatory breaches and client harm, should guide the selection and implementation of any changes. Continuous monitoring and feedback loops are also crucial to ensure that optimized processes remain compliant and effective over time. Question 19. What factors determine the most appropriate method for Swatch to optimize its internal customer onboarding process, ensuring both efficiency gains and strict adherence to the regulatory framework specified for the Swatch hiring assessment test? Option A. Focusing primarily on cost-saving measures by streamlining documentation requirements, even if it means reducing the depth of customer due diligence. Option B. A comprehensive review of existing Swatch operational procedures against the relevant regulatory framework, prioritizing data integrity, customer protection, and fair dealing principles. Option C. Implementing the fastest available technology solutions to reduce onboarding time, regardless of their immediate alignment with all regulatory stipulations. Option D. Prioritizing the introduction of new marketing features within the onboarding process to enhance customer engagement, with regulatory review occurring post-implementation. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive review of existing Swatch operational procedures against the relevant regulatory framework, prioritizing data integrity, customer protection, and fair dealing principles. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Swatch employee tasked with optimizing internal processes. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficiency and innovation with the strict adherence to regulatory frameworks and ethical guidelines governing the financial services industry. A deep understanding of these requirements is crucial to avoid potential compliance breaches, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any process optimization initiative not only improves operational effectiveness, but also upholds the integrity and trustworthiness expected of financial professionals. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing Swatch operational procedures against the relevant regulatory framework, specifically focusing on the principles of data integrity, customer protection, and fair dealing as mandated by the Swatch hiring assessment test specified jurisdiction. This approach prioritizes compliance by ensuring that any proposed changes are vetted for their impact on regulatory adherence before implementation. It demonstrates a commitment to operating within legal boundaries and ethical standards, which is paramount in the financial sector. This proactive stance minimizes risks and builds confidence in Swatch's operational integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for compliance obligations, potentially leading to breaches of data privacy laws, misrepresentation of services, or unfair treatment of customers, all of which carry significant penalties. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment would also be flawed. This haste could overlook critical control points, introduce vulnerabilities, or result in processes that, while fast, are not compliant or ethical, thereby exposing Swatch to regulatory scrutiny and potential sanctions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all relevant laws, guidelines, and internal policies. Subsequently, any proposed process optimization should be evaluated through a risk-based lens, assessing its potential impact on compliance, customer welfare, and operational integrity. Seeking input from compliance officers and legal counsel is a vital step in this process to ensure all aspects are thoroughly reviewed. Finally, decisions should be made based on a holistic assessment that prioritizes long-term sustainability, ethical conduct, and regulatory adherence over short-term gains. Question 20. The assessment process reveals that the Swatch hiring assessment test for the junior watchmaker role is taking longer than anticipated, leading to a backlog of applications. To expedite the process, management is considering several options to optimize efficiency. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with the integrity and fairness of the assessment? Option A. Conducting a detailed review of the assessment content and administration to identify specific areas for streamlining without compromising the evaluation of essential competencies. Option B, reducing the time allocated for each assessment module and removing one of the practical skill demonstration tasks. Option C, implementing a more rigorous pre-screening questionnaire to filter out a larger number of candidates before they reach the main assessment stages. Option D, relying more heavily on initial interview feedback to make hiring decisions, thereby shortening the assessment duration. The correct answer is C, implementing a more rigorous pre-screening questionnaire to filter out a larger number of candidates before they reach the main assessment stages. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficiency in the hiring process with the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure fairness and prevent discrimination. The Swatch hiring assessment test, like many professional assessments, is designed to evaluate candidates objectively. However, the pressure to optimize the process can lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise these principles. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement improvements that enhance efficiency without introducing bias or violating assessment guidelines. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the assessment's content and administration to identify potential bottlenecks or areas where candidates might be disadvantaged due to factors unrelated to their suitability for the role. This includes analyzing the clarity of instructions, the relevance of assessment tasks to job requirements, and the fairness of scoring mechanisms. By focusing on these aspects, Swatch can optimize the process in a way that is both efficient and compliant with best practices in assessment design and ethical hiring. This aligns with the implicit regulatory expectation of fair and objective evaluation, ensuring that all candidates are assessed on their merits and that the process itself does not create undue barriers. An incorrect approach would be to simply reduce the number of assessment stages or shorten the time allocated for tasks without a thorough analysis of their impact. This could lead to a superficial evaluation, potentially overlooking qualified candidates or unfairly penalizing others who require more time to demonstrate their abilities. Such an approach risks introducing bias, as certain candidate groups might be disproportionately affected by time constraints or reduced evaluation depth. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on subjective feedback from assessors without a standardized framework for evaluation. This opens the door to personal biases and inconsistencies, undermining the objectivity of the assessment and potentially violating principles of fair treatment. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the core objectives of the assessment and the regulatory or ethical standards it must uphold. This involves a data-driven analysis of the current process, identifying specific areas for improvement. The focus should always be on enhancing the validity and reliability of the assessment, while ensuring it is administered fairly and equitably. If changes are considered, their potential impact on different candidate groups and overall fairness must be carefully evaluated before implementation.